Jennie Cramer walked out of her mother's rooms in New Haven on a Thursday morning in August, and from that moment, nobody could say with any certainty where she was. 2 days later, a man getting his boat ready before dawn saw something white lying in the shallows off West Haven, and the 42 hours in between were never accounted for by anyone, in any room, under any oath. She had been born in the spring of 1860, the middle of 3 children. Her father, Jacob Cramer, had come over from Germany and kept a cigar shop in the city, and Jennie was the only one who never worked behind the counter. She had been a sickly child, and the family had made much of her ever since. She left school at 15 and did not go looking for a place, unlike most girls in New Haven at that age. Her time went to her friends and to how she looked when she went out. Dark brown hair, dark blue eyes, a fair complexion. People in the city called her the Belle of New Haven. A photograph of her was taken in those years, and it still exists. Her father's shop stood directly across the street from a dry goods store owned by Edward Malley, the richest man in town. A clerk worked in that store, a nephew of the owner named James Malley, and it took him no distance at all to find reasons to come over. Jennie Cramer had spent that summer keeping track of which young men called on her daughter. She understood exactly how quickly a girl's name could be spoiled, and she had no intention of letting it happen. On the night of Wednesday, the 3rd of August, her daughter did not come home at all, and when she came back the next morning, there was a quarrel about it in the front room. Then Jennie Cramer stepped out of that room to get hold of herself. When she came back in, Jennie was gone. Nobody went after her. In that year and that city, a girl walking out of her mother's house after a quarrel about her reputation was an ordinary sort of disaster. It stayed an ordinary one until Saturday morning. What the quarrel was about had started weeks earlier, with a rule Jennie had made for herself. That summer, Jennie Cramer would not go out riding with James Malley alone. He was 23, 2 years older than she was, and by every account of him, he was pursuing Jennie hard. He sent notes across the street to the cigar shop. She would take a walk or a dinner, and she would not get into a carriage with him unaccompanied, and on that point, she did not move. What she made of him is told 2 ways. One version has her coming into the store to flirt, and him soon infatuated. Another has her not especially interested in his attentions and taking the invitations regardless, because she liked long summer evenings, and she liked being looked at. Her mother had her own calculation running. She believed her daughter's face was worth a marriage into a family with money, and she watched the callers with that in mind. So the thing was arranged around a second couple. James Malley's cousin Walter was Edward Malley's son, a quiet young man who had gone to a good school and then to Yale and finished neither. Walter had a young woman he brought up from New York, and she was introduced to Jennie as his fiancée, a wealthy girl from Long Island, who would be engaged to him shortly. With 4 of them in the carriage, there was nothing improper in any of it. Almost nothing Jennie Cramer said was ever written down, and putting people like her back on the record is most of the reason this channel exists. Subscribe, and the next one will find you. On the night of the 23rd of July, the 4 of them went out again. It was a hot evening, and Jennie did not come in until nearly morning. Her mother was awake and waiting. Coming home at that hour was not a thing a young lady did, she told her, and a name once spoiled did not come back. Jennie said it had not been her fault. They had gone on to the Malley mansion, and when she wanted to leave, there had been no gentleman willing to walk her home. There had been a fiancé in that carriage the entire evening. That was the whole reason the evening had been proper. 11 days later, on Wednesday the 3rd of August, Edward Malley was away traveling, and his house was empty of him. Jennie went out with the same 3 people, and this time she did not come home at all. She came back on Thursday morning, and the young woman she knew as Walter Malley's fiancée came with her and did the talking. The two of them had spent the night at a rooming house that took women only, she said. Another account of the same conversation has her saying they had spent it in her own hotel room. Either way, the point she pressed was that nothing improper had occurred. Her daughter was alive and standing in front of her. Jennie Cramer did not believe one word of the explanation, and she did not believe the woman delivering it was any kind of lady. What she said to her daughter next survives because it was repeated afterward under oath. "Don't you know that you are disgracing yourself and disgracing your parents by staying out overnight?" There was a younger daughter in that family, away from home and expected back soon. Her mother brought her into it. "If you carry on like that, we must find a place for you to stay when your little sister comes home. We can't have you here." She was crying before she got to the end of it. The young woman from New York stood there through all of it. Jennie Cramer went out of the room to compose herself. When she came back, the room was empty, and her daughter had gone out of the house with Miss Douglas, and neither of them had said where. She had said find somewhere else to live, and the girl had gone, and the two things were not supposed to have anything to do with one another. By that afternoon, she was across the street in Edward Malley's store. She found James Malley there, and she told him to his face that he had brought her daughter into bad company. He was steady with her. Blanche Douglas was a perfect lady, he said. The two young women had spent Wednesday night at the Elliott house, exactly as she had been told that morning. He was sorry for her worry, and he made her a promise. If he came across Jennie, he would bring her home himself, and if he could not manage that, he would send word. She went back across the street on the strength of it and waited. Thursday closed with nothing. Friday opened with nothing. Then the word came. It was a note from James Malley. Neither he nor Miss Douglas knew where Jennie was. At daybreak on Saturday, the 6th of August, an oysterman named Asahel Curtis was getting his boat ready for the day's catch when he saw something lying out in the shallow water with the waves breaking over it. He waded out to look. It was a young woman in a white dress, and he lifted her and carried her up onto the beach himself before he went for the authorities. By the time officials reached the shore, a small crowd had gathered on the sand, and somebody standing in it had already said the name, Jennie Cramer. She had died recently enough that there was no decomposition on her at all. She was dressed for an evening out, which on that stretch of shore was not remarkable. The Savin Rock amusement grounds were close by, and young people came out to them all summer long. The first conclusion was drowning. The second arrived within a few hours, and it was not a conclusion about the water at all. Jennie Cramer was 21 and unmarried, and she had stayed out all night more than once that summer. Perhaps she had found herself expecting a child, and that was why a girl in a good dress had walked into the sea before dawn. That theory was circulating before anyone had opened her. There were bruises on the body, and to the men who looked at her first, the bruises sat comfortably enough inside the drowning, and the drowning sat comfortably enough inside everything they had heard about her. They carried her up to a boathouse on the beach and sent for 2 physicians. There was almost no water in her lungs, and none in her stomach. West Haven had no city government of its own in 1881, so investigating a death there fell to a coroner's jury of 6 local men. That jury was on its way to a finding of drowning, with the bruises to support it and a family quarrel to explain it. One of the 6 was not satisfied. He said so, and because he said so, an autopsy was ordered instead of a verdict. The arrests, the year of hearings, the trial itself, all of it came out of that one refusal by a man in a room of 6 who would not put his name to the easy answer. The autopsy ran 7 hours. It established that Jennie Cramer had not drowned and that she had been criminally assaulted, an assault upon her person, within a day or 2 of her death. It could not say what killed her. So the physicians took out her internal organs and sealed them in jars, and inside a day the newspapers were telling their readers that the doctors were hunting for drugs or poison. The guess that went round New Haven was laudanum or chloroform, something given to her beforehand, not the thing that finished her. While the doctors worked, so did the reporters, and so did the local officers. James Malley, Walter Malley, and the young woman they called Blanche Douglas were all questioned in those first days, and their first statements did not agree with one another. Within a short time, they agreed perfectly. All three now said they had been with Jennie on the Wednesday night, that none of them had laid eyes on her after Thursday noon, and that none of them had been anywhere near Savin Rock on the Friday. Then the chemical analysis came back. 0.8 of a grain of arsenic, spread through 8 of her organs, and that was only what remained in her. What she had swallowed was several times that quantity, and it had gone into her within hours of her death. On the 15th of August, James and Walter Malley were arrested and charged with murder. By the time the arrests were made, the case had stopped belonging to New Haven. Edward Malley came home from his travels to find his son and his nephew in the hands of the authorities. Inside a day, he had engaged a team of attorneys and put private detectives on the ground. Reporters asked him about Walter and the young woman who had been staying in his house. He said he had never known Walter to be with a girl at all, and then he added that boys will be boys, and that they would find that was all there was to the matter. While he was saying that, the state was assembling an exhibit out of Jennie Cramer. Sealed vials of fluid, one for each organ, laid out so that a jury and a gallery could look at the arsenic that had been in her stomach, her liver, her heart. A separate pamphlet was printed, setting the toxicological results out in figures for anyone who cared to have them. A newspaper of the period wrote that the child had been cut up, boiled, and fried, and fricasseed, and roasted to find traces of poison. Her portrait went out across the country in the same weeks. It had been made while she was alive, a girl sitting for a photographer in New Haven. Now it was printed and reprinted, copied from copies, run through presses in cities where nobody had ever laid eyes on Jennie Cramer. It came out a little further from her each time. Then came the pamphlet. It carried that portrait on the cover and the testimony that had led to the arrests inside it, and it told its readers what they were to do about it. Every father and brother in Connecticut, it said, should make it their own cause to hunt the criminals to the death, be the criminals either tramps or millionaires. It sold out completely and went to a second printing. It was widely believed in New Haven that most of the copies had been bought by the Malley family. The inquest sat through the rest of August, and Blanche Douglas gave her account first. The night of the 3rd had not been spent at any rooming house. The 4 of them had been at the Malley mansion, drinking, and she had felt too unwell to go back to her hotel. Walter told her she could stay. She had talked a reluctant Jennie into staying with her, and the 2 of them had shared a room. They took breakfast in the morning. She walked Jennie home, and the last she saw of her was around noon on Thursday. James Malley told the inquest he had last seen Jennie when the 2 women left the mansion that morning. Asked where he had been on the Friday night, he said at home, and that his whole family would swear to it. Then he stopped and corrected himself in front of the jury. His father, he said, had come to him after the newspaper reports and asked him where he was on the Friday night. No, his father had come to him and said, "It's a lucky thing for you that you were home Friday night." Walter said much the same, and offered that Jennie had probably gone down to her brother in New York. After she testified, Blanche Douglas went back to New York, and officers went after her. The address she had given the court belonged to nobody. They found her working in a brothel, and her name was not Blanche Douglas. It was Anna Kearns, and she had left a husband she described as violent and taken a new name to stay out of his way. She had met the Malley cousins earlier that year when they came to the house where she worked. Walter had taken a liking to her and started sending her notes. Then he invited her up to his father's mansion in New Haven, and that is where she was introduced to Jennie Cramer as a wealthy young woman from Long Island. She was charged with perjury and brought back to Connecticut in custody. The fiancé, who had been produced to make an evening respectable, was now the only living person who had been inside that house. In the weeks after she was brought back, 3 people worked on Blanche Douglas, and they worked on her from 3 directions. One of the physicians who had performed the autopsy, Dr. Painter, had taken a particular interest in the case, and his advice to her was practical. "Cut yourself loose from the Malleys," he said, "because they will give you up long before you give them up." The officers put it harder. The Malleys were the wealthiest family in the county and could hire the best legal team in Connecticut, and they had already hired it. If she would not tell them what had happened to Jennie Cramer, there was nothing to stop the state from treating her as a suspect in the killing rather than a witness to it. And Sheriff Peck made the offer that decided it. She was frightened of a cell. He told her she could stay with his own family instead of going into one. She talked. She had not come to New Haven as anybody's fiancée. She had come because Walter invited her, and she had stayed because there was something she was there to do. James Malley wanted Jennie Cramer, and Walter and Blanche were there to help him get her. The night of the 23rd of July, the night Jennie came home at nearly 4 in the morning, they had not gone to any resort. They had gone to a restaurant with rooms upstairs. Blanche went into one of them with Walter, and through the wall she could hear James trying to get Jennie into the other, and she could hear Jennie refusing, and she gave the jury the words, "Don't, don't." The 3rd of August had gone further. Edward Malley was away, and the mansion was theirs, and there was a great deal of drink. James had asked the 2 of them outright to help him persuade Jennie to stay the night, and Blanche had produced the illness to make it happen. Then, they had not stayed together in one room, as she had sworn in open session that they did. She had gone with Walter. James took Jennie into another room, and Jennie did not go willingly, and after the door closed, Blanche Douglas heard her screaming. She had one thing more. When she got back to New York, 2 gentlemen came to see her, one of whom she took to be Edward Malley's brother, and they offered to pay her way to Europe and to keep her there until the whole business was finished. When it became clear there was nothing further coming, the perjury charge against her was dropped, and Blanche Douglas was charged with murder. And then they asked her the only question the state actually needed answered. Had she seen Jennie Cramer at any point after Thursday, the 4th of August? She said no. They asked again, and she said no. And she went on saying no through every proceeding that followed. "If you was to hang a rope around my neck, I couldn't say different." She had handed over the entire arrangement and kept back the one thing that would have put anybody in a room with Jennie Cramer after Thursday noon. Through the rest of August and into September, people began changing their minds. Witnesses had come forward in the first weeks, saying they had seen James and Walter Malley and Blanche Douglas in company with Jennie Cramer on the Thursday and again on the Friday. A woman who lived near the Elliott house told the court she had seen all 3 of them with Jennie on the Thursday. Another had seen Blanche and Jennie together on the Thursday evening. A waiter had served Walter, Blanche, and Jennie at 10 o'clock on the Wednesday night, which left very little of that evening for a party at the mansion. As the case moved along, those same people grew less and less certain of it. It became difficult to find a witness who would say plainly in a courtroom what he had said about Jennie Cramer in August. Rumors went round New Haven that money was being paid for the change, and nobody was ever charged over it. On the 3rd of September, the coroner's jury returned its verdicts. James Malley was criminally responsible. Walter Malley and Blanche Douglas were morally responsible. The death of Jennie Cramer, the jury found, had come by poison and violence. The case went next to the local court at West Haven, and the indictment that arrived there ran to 5 counts against the Malleys: arsenic, drowning, suffocation, chloroform, the use of liquor and drugs. Against Blanche Douglas, 1 count only. That court sat until the end of October and heard more than 200 witnesses. A good deal of it turned on the Friday night at Savin Rock and a woman on the carousel who had cried out that she was paralyzed. A witness named Margaret Kane produced her own companion, a man with a mustache, and said the woman had been her, taken by a dizzy spell. A married couple came forward and said it had been Jennie. That was never settled. At the end of it, the court found cause to try all three on one count alone, the arsenic. By then, her portrait had been in circulation for 2 months, while 200 people were being asked to remember one young woman's face. That face was being set into type in newspapers from one end of the country to the other, and every reprinting took a little more out of it. In the months before the trial, both sides agreed to have Jennie Cramer taken out of the ground. The single count had left each of them with a problem. The state could not argue that she had been smothered in a panic, because arsenic is not a panic. Somebody has to buy it, carry it, and put it into a person. And premeditation was now the only thing the state was permitted to prove. The defense had the mirror of it, and to keep the drowning alive, they had to persuade a jury that a young woman in a white dress had walked into the water on a Friday night with poison already inside her. So the defense stopped arguing about where she had been and started arguing about what kind of girl she was. Their theory was that she had been an arsenic eater. A good many young women of that period swallowed small quantities of it and rubbed it into the face, believing it improved the complexion. If Jennie had been one of them, then what the analysis had found was a habit and not a murder. The state wanted a figure exact enough to hand to a jury. Both sides wanted the bones for opposite reasons. The bones came back almost clean. Whatever she had swallowed, she had not been swallowing it for long, and the arsenic eater did not survive the examination. This was the one thing in the whole case that anybody measured with any exactness, and even so, the surviving accounts give the quantity 3 different ways. It disposed of the arsenic eater. It left the 2 days exactly as empty as it found them. On the 17th of January, 1882, the charges against all 3 were consolidated into a single count of murder in the 1st degree. The following month, the Malley store burned to the ground. Arson was suspected. The insurance company declined to pay on a technicality, and no source connects the fire to the case. The trial opened on the 25th of April, and the first week of it went to seating a jury, because there was hardly a man left in New Haven who had not formed an opinion about whether the men were guilty. The prosecutor, Tilton Doolittle, put the state's case plainly. Walter Malley had brought Blanche Douglas up from New York so that James could get what he wanted from Jennie Cramer, and once he had it, she had been poisoned for fear of what she would say. The defense answered on 3 fronts at once. One attorney put it to the jury that she had killed herself. Another leaned on the alibis, made light of the state's science, and said that among all the chemistry, nobody had properly considered that the girl had simply drowned. Blanche Douglas's counsel argued that even if she had died of arsenic, nothing whatever put it in the defendant's hands. They also produced a physician of their own, who disputed the finding that she had been assaulted at all. It ran until the last day of June. Then Judge Miles Granger instructed the jury on what it was allowed to decide. They were deciding whether these 3 had killed Jennie Cramer with arsenic. They were not deciding whether she had been criminally assaulted. They were not deciding whether anyone had lied to a coroner, to a court, or to her mother. The testimony had been contradictory, the judge told them, and most of the evidence was circumstantial. The jury was out for 1 hour. Not guilty, all 3. Walter Malley had spent his months in custody writing a waltz, which was published that year and sold as sheet music under the title Under the Elms. That evening, his family gave a large party to celebrate. The newspapers and the public came down on them for it. Blanche Douglas went back to jail the same night. There was nowhere else for her to go. Jacob Cramer did not live to see the end of the trial. The The cause of death entered for him was phthisis, which was the word then in use for consumption. 2 later accounts of the case say he took his own life. Jennie Cramer lived another 9 years. By 1883, she had stopped believing that Jennie was dead. She told people that Jennie was alive somewhere and would be coming back to her. She went on telling them through the years when the men who had been charged were getting on with their lives, and through the years when the newspapers had long since found something else to sell. Her husband was gone. Her daughter was in the ground and had been taken out of it once already. She said it anyway, and she kept saying it. Jennie Cramer died in July of 1891 by her own hand. Walter Malley kept up with Blanche Douglas for years after the verdict, and he was blackmailed at one point over letters that had been taken from her. In time, he married a woman named Anna Madden, and a good many people in New Haven believed Anna Madden and Anna Kearns were the same person. The acquittal did not settle anything in New Haven. Charges that the Malleys had bought their freedom followed the family for decades, and no such charge was ever brought in a courtroom or answered in one. Edward Malley's store did not suffer for any of it. It went on trading through the rest of his life and through the lives of everyone who had sat in that courtroom. It finally closed in 1980, years after Jennie Cramer was carried out of the water at West Haven. Nobody was ever convicted of anything in connection with her death. How the arsenic reached her has never been established. Neither has the one thing the entire case was built on and never once supplied. 2 pictures of her survive. One is the portrait taken while she was living, a young woman sitting for a photographer in New Haven. The other is one of the reprints, run off after her death and copied from copies until the lines went soft. In it, the mouth and the eyes have stopped being hers. Set the 2 beside each other, and they are not the same face. Jennie Cramer was born in New Haven in the spring of 1860, and she lived 21 years. Of all of it, the only part anybody ever tried seriously to establish was the last 2 days, and nobody managed it.